watching Just the News. I'm Amata Balachandra. We start off today's bulletin with fuel price hike. It's been hiked for the third time this week by 80 paise per litre. Both petrol and diesel prices have so far been raised by 2.40 rupees per litre this week as compared to last week. There was a one-day halt on the rise of fuel prices, but that has now come back up with 80 paise increase. This comes amidst the rising crude oil prices in the international market. We'll put up a chart of what prices are in different cities. Delhi, for instance, petrol is at 97.81 rupees per litre. In Mumbai, petrol is at 112.51 rupees per litre. In Chennai, petrol is at 103.67 rupees per litre. And Kolkata, petrol is at 107.18 rupees per litre. Moving on from the story now to what's happening in Calcutta in the Birbhum violence case. The Calcutta High Court has ordered the CBI to probe the killings in the Birbhum's Boktoi village case. Now, 8 people, to give you a background of what happened, 8 people were charred to death after their houses were set on fire. And this was following the murder of a deputy Gram Pradhan associated with the TMC. Now, the court has asked the CBI to submit its preliminary report on the 7th of April when the matter will be heard again. The court has also directed the state government to extend full cooperation to CBI in carrying out further investigation. In the meantime, Mamata Banerjee-led TMC has said that it will offer full cooperation and abide by the court's order. Yesterday, we saw the Chief Minister of West Bengal, Mamata Banerjee, visit that village, also order the police to arrest a TMC block president as well. We saw that happen yesterday. Now the Calcutta High Court has asked the CBI to take over this case. The SIT so far has arrested 22 people, including the TMC's Rampurhat 1 block president Anarul Hussain. Meanwhile, in Uttar Pradesh, Yogi Adityanath was sworn in today as Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister for the second time, becoming the first Chief Minister in 37 years to return to power after completing a full term in the state. Now, apart from Yogi Adityanath, 52 other ministers were sworn in. Mr. Yogi Adityanath will again have 2 deputies. Keshav Prasad Maurya, who lost the UP election, will continue as Deputy Chief Minister. But Dinesh Sharma will be replaced by Brahmin leader Brajesh Pathak. Also, speaking to NDTV, Karnataka Education Minister B.C. Nagesh has said that there won't be any provisions or exceptions made for those who want to wear hijab even during their board exams. Now, there have been a couple of reports in the last 1 week after the Karnataka High Court upheld the hijab ban in educational institutions that students weren't attending exams because they weren't allowed to wear hijab. Now, V.C. Nagesh, speaking to NDTV, has said, and I quote, "There won't be any concession. The students must follow the High Court's judgment. No one will be allowed to take their exams with their hijabs. If the students realize their mistake, they will be allowed to take supplementary exams 2 months after the board exams, but again, without the hijab." End quote. Also in the news, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar met Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on Friday and conveyed to him that the bilateral relations are disturbed due to the amassing of Chinese troops and that the ties cannot be normal till the border situation is resolved. Now, after 15 rounds of border talks between military commanders, the minister said that the bilateral ties were work in progress. Also, there's news coming in from Tamil Nadu. According to the National Center for Seismology, 3 slight or minor earthquakes were experienced early today in Tamil Nadu's Dindigul region in a span of about 2 hours. The first tremor's magnitude was 1.2, and after 2 tremors reported a magnitude of 1.5. An update on what's going on in the Parliament. The Finance Bill 2022 was approved by the Lok Sabha after accepting 39 official amendments moved by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman and rejecting the amendments proposed by the opposition by voice vote. Now, the Finance Bill gives effect to new taxation, thus completing the budgetary exercise for 2022-23 fiscal. Also, we told you a couple of days ago that the Delhi Municipal Corporation Bill 2022 is in the works. That was introduced in the Lok Sabha today amid objections by opposition parties. Now, the bill intends to give the central government more power over the corporation as against the elected state government, as it mentions that the word government in the Delhi Municipal Corporation Act 1957 will be replaced with central government everywhere. Moving on now, let's take a look at what's happening in Ukraine. It's been a month since Russia invaded Ukraine, and here are the latest updates. There's news coming in from Mariupol that Ukrainian officials are now fearing that 300 people could have died in last week's Russian strike on a theater in Mariupol. Now, President Vladimir Zelenskyy has said last week that hundreds of people had taken refuge in the building at the time of the attack. But this is an estimated number that's coming in that Ukrainian officials are fearing at this point in time. Mariupol continues to be one of the worst affected cities in Ukraine, where the president had earlier said that over 1 lakh people are now stuck without any food or water or electricity, all of which is depleting at the moment. Meanwhile, according to local police in Ukraine, 4 civilians have been killed and several others wounded after Russian strikes hit a medical center in Kharkiv. Now, local police said, and I quote, "This morning, following a bombardment on civilian infrastructure from several rocket launchers, 7 civilians were injured, 4 of them died," end quote. The strikes had targeted a medical center in the city. Also, Russia's defense ministry today has said that it liberated 93% of the territory of the self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Republic, one of the 2 Russian-backed breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine. Now, the ministry earlier said that the main targets of the first phase of what Russia calls it a special operation in Ukraine had been completed. Also in the news, Ukraine President Zelenskyy has appealed to EU leaders who had gathered on Thursday in Brussels for an emergency summit to move quickly on Ukraine's application to join the bloc. Now, he said, and I quote, "Here I ask you, do not delay, please. For us, this is a chance," end quote. In the meantime, in an attempt to reduce reliance on Russian energy, the US and EU have announced deals on LNG or liquefied natural gas. Now, with the agreement, the US will provide the EU with at least 15 billion additional cubic meters of the fuel by the end of the year. Now, the EU had said that it will cut Russian gas use in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia currently supplies about 40% of EU's gas needs. Also, in response to what United States President Biden had said, the Kremlin today has said that US claims of Russia possibly resorting to chemical weapons in Ukraine was a tactic to divert attention away from awkward questions for Washington. In a press conference, Kremlin spokesperson has said that the military would submit proposals to President Vladimir Putin on how Russia should strengthen its defenses in response to NATO beefing up its eastern flank. Now, earlier, US President Joe Biden had said that NATO would respond if Russia used chemical weapons in Ukraine. Meanwhile, according to a government official in Switzerland, the country has frozen around 5.75 billion Swiss francs worth of Russian assets covered by sanctions, and that amount is likely to rise. Now, this is a report according to Reuters. There are additional sanctions being placed on Russia as well. Australia, for instance, has imposed sanctions on Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, his family members, and 22 Russian individuals who it called propagandists and disinformation operatives. Now, Australian Foreign Minister said that Belarus continues to provide strategic support to Russia and its military forces in their assault, and this is what Australia said, and I quote, "in their assault on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine," end quote. Meanwhile, this has largely been the response of India after S. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister's comments that India is only looking at peace and that the war should end soon. India has now abstained in the United Nations General Assembly on resolution blaming Russia for Ukraine humanitarian crisis, also urging an immediate ceasefire. The resolution was adopted with 140 votes in favor of it as opposed to 5 votes against it. There were 38 abstentions, including India. Following this, permanent representative of India to the United Nations, T.S. Tirumurthy, said, and I quote, "What we require now is to focus on cessation of hostilities and urgent humanitarian assistance. The draft resolution didn't fully reflect our expected focus on these challenges," end quote. Moving on to business news right now, according to a report by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, India's projected GDP growth for FY 2022, has been downgraded from 6.7% to 4.6%. Now, citing the Ukraine war for the cut in forecast, it added that India is expected to face reflexes from trade sanctions, food inflation, and financial instability. Now, the report also said Russia will experience a deep recession this year. Also in the news, Minister of State for Communications informed Rajya Sabha that spectrum auctions will be conducted very soon and the next generation 5G services are expected to commence before the end of the year. Now, he went on to say that 4 companies have been allotted spectrum for conducting trials, and the trials are expected to be completed soon as well. Moving on to environment news right now, Australian officials have confirmed that the Great Barrier Reef is being devastated by another mass bleaching event. Now, it is the 4th time in 6 years that such severe and widespread damage caused by warm sea temperatures has been detected. Now, bleaching occurs when stressed corals expel color-giving algae. Moving on to global news right now, this one comes in from Sri Lanka. We've been reporting that Sri Lanka is facing massive economic crisis at this point in time. The latest is that 2 major Sri Lankan newspapers are suspending their print editions because of a lack of paper. Now, the newspapers will only be available online. South Asian nation of 22 million people is facing its worst ever economic meltdown since independence from Britain in 1948 after its foreign reserves hit rock bottom. Now, school tests for nearly 3 million out of Sri Lanka's 4.5 million pupils were postponed indefinitely last week after the authorities failed to source enough paper and ink. Now, Sri Lanka is also facing a surge in prices of essentials and fuel. There were also reports that troops were stationed at gas stations as a lot of people are queuing up for fuel, leading to sporadic protests and violence as well. One piece of good news before we wrap things up here on this bulletin. For the first time since April 1st, 2020, Mumbai's Dharavi has reported no active COVID cases, and this was on Thursday. During the first wave, the highest number of cases reported in Dharavi in a single day were 94, which was on the 3rd of May. However, by May 2020, the number of COVID cases in Dharavi had begun to decline, and in June, it had flattened the curve during the first wave. That brings us to the end of this bulletin. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.